Okay, so um, what I'd like to do now is really focus on critical incident stress debriefing. And like I said, um, I did post an article that I'd like you to read this week on D2L. It's by Jeff Mitchell. Um, and uh, he was at the University of Maryland. He was the one who originated CISD, Critical Incident Stress Debriefing. And um, and it's really not a complicated article. He starts out kind of giving the background, and then he kind of talks about the stages of CISD, and then he talks about a little bit of the research, some of the studies that have been done using it. Um, I want to start out, first of all, with just some examples from personal experiences, and and then I'll go through every stage, every phase, he calls them, of the model, and talk about how to use them. But most of my examples are from the Red Cross. They incorporate critical incident stress debriefing. I think they can do it more, but some of their resources and personnel are a bit limited. Um, Usually in larger metropolitan areas, they have a lot more people with a lot more expertise. So, for instance, I used to be in Allegheny County Red Cross, and then they expanded that area. And then I moved to Hempfield near Greensburg, PA, and that put me in a different area. Um, but I also volunteer with the National Red Cross. Haven't done much internationally with the Red Cross, but um, have worked internationally through various missions and other organizations. Um, so just the concept of critical incident stress debriefing has to do primarily with secondary trauma. And so some people would like to use critical incident stress debriefing with the victim or the individual who has experienced a crisis or possibly a trauma. I personally just believe that they need more than CISD. Um, if somebody's actually experienced a severe crisis that could lead to personal trauma, I believe that they should probably have some individual therapy just to assess how they're doing, what the severity of the uh, crisis and trauma might be, how it is affecting them. Um, so I do think they need something that is even more therapeutic. When I use the word therapeutic, um, some people might say that CISD is therapeutic, but when I think therapeutic, I'm thinking therapy, so I think that's where the word comes from, therapeutic, from therapy. And um, I would recommend that for any individual who experienced the crisis personally, uh, who was a victim, who uh, may have been traumatized, who may experience trauma. Um, and so that I think is a little more in depth than critical incident stress debriefing. So, who is CISD for? And the Red Cross primarily uses it for volunteers, for first responders, or uh, anybody who responded to a scene but was not um, originally impacted. So it could be family members, friends who responded as well. So let me give you some examples. Uh, Many times, um, when we think about first responders, we think about police officers, fire department personnel, um, you know, could be like, you know, emergency medical individuals. It could be, any type of Red Cross worker who are responding to a disaster situation. It could be individuals who drove in to help their families, but didn't experience it firsthand. Um, but when we think about it, even though they may have not experienced it firsthand, even though they are first responders coming to the scene, there is a lot going on. Um, so just thinking about what these individuals experience, um, we also have to think about, okay, what's the impact for first responders? And I'm just going to use that term. Um, and in many cases, first responders experience their own uh, individual crisis beyond the people they're trying to help. So, for instance, somebody might be trapped in a home fire, and a fire department might be called, and they might enter the house and rescue that individual. But entering that fire, they are experiencing crisis, even though it's on a professional level. And so we do have to kind of assess, is critical incident stress debriefing enough? Did they feel as though their own lives were threatened? Did it become complicated? Uh, and so we do have to assess, do they need further intervention on a therapeutic level as well? And I think that critical incident stress debriefing, one of the first things it does is works at assessing the individual needs of each person. And, and we can always refer them for further therapeutic intervention if we think they need it. That's one of the beauties of critical incident stress debriefing. It gives us the opportunity to kind of assess where each person is. And it's not only um, the the person leading CISD that assesses it. We ask them, you know, uh, do you need more help with this? Do you need to talk with somebody individually? How are you dealing with this? Because a lot of first responders enter into a situation and it becomes more complicated. Their lives could also be threatened by fire, a flood, um, perhaps a physical threat, like a shooter, or somebody, um, who is violent for whatever reason. And so we have to take all of this into consideration. Critical incident stress debriefing is wonderful. I think it works. I support it. I've experienced it uh, on multiple layers. I've run critical incident stress debriefing groups, and I've also been a volunteer participating in them after a crisis. Uh, so I'm kind of giving all these qualifiers that it's great on its own, but the individuals uh, might need more than CISD as well. And that's something we all have to take into consideration. We don't just want to do CISD if somebody needs more care. Um, and so I always keep an open mind. I always try to, I'm not just saying, oh, I'm doing CISD, you're good to go. I really do take the assessment part seriously to see if individuals have deeper needs. Um, so, what think about all of the different varieties of emergencies. And I think that people respond to these emergencies, and uh, you know, um, I think that when, if a person doesn't feel that their own life is in danger, they still experience some pretty severe situations. Uh, so, for instance, somebody responding to a fire or a flood, they are uh, experiencing other people's suffering on many different levels. So it could be that an individual, perhaps their house was destroyed in a fire or a flood. Perhaps they lost a pet or a loved one, a human being, in that disaster. Perhaps they were injured. Um, a lot of first responders may experience victims who, they are with them when they die. And that is, you know, a pretty significant experience. Um, and no matter how well trained somebody is in whatever their profession is, I can tell you, we all have empathy. We all care, or they wouldn't be doing it, you know. And having empathy and experiencing, um, you know, any injury or death or somebody else's loss, that impacts first responders quite a bit. And it can impact them in a couple different ways. In one way, um, it could impact them qualitatively. So they might just experience the suffering or loss of one individual. But that hits somebody hard, that is significant. Or they could experience suffering quantitatively. Maybe they go into a town and the whole town experienced a flood, and it's just mass destruction. And everybody is experiencing loss or um, and it's really a large number of individuals who are suffering from, a certain emergency. So that's quantitative. It's almost overwhelming sometimes. Uh, or it could be both, you know, it could be the severity and it could be a large number. So it could be a combination of both. And many times it is. Um, I think that uh, all of these things have to be taken into consideration. And I'll just share some personal experiences. My very first experience um, of crisis was when I was a child, and I grew up in central PA, a little town called Chambersburg. And one of the people who lived near my house uh, built pools. That was his business. And he he converted a farm to kind of where he would store machinery and equipment, but also he would store all of the pool chemicals in a kind of a barn warehouse facility, and it caught fire. And um, chlorine was one of the main things that were stored in that barn. And it created a chlorine cloud that enveloped my entire neighborhood. And we had to be evacuated. And and we ended up, staying for a day in one of the fire halls. And fortunately, nobody was hurt. People were treated in the hospital because they inhaled the chlorine, but nobody was seriously hurt. Um, but that's the first time I really noticed, you know, uh, how so many people cared about their neighbors during an emergency and how many different people came out to help of all varieties in all different capacities and professions. People from the hospital offering medical services, people from, the fire department with all of their expertise, police helping to evacuate and making sure everything was orderly. Red Cross workers who provided food and cots and whatever else people needed. One of the first things that the Red Cross workers gave us, and I didn't understand why at the time, was because it was the middle of summer, they gave us blankets. And it's only later that I understood that it's really something that people use not only to stay warm, but to comfort themselves. And recently, my wife got involved in a volunteer organization. My wife knits and crochets, and so she has a knitting circle, and they usually make their own things, but they have made things for cancer treatment centers like hats or mittens or things like that. And but they were asked by this organization to provide handmade blankets for kids, and uh, they send them to any school shooting. Um, and when the Red Cross responds and this organization, and they don't only give the kids and their families Red Cross blankets, but they give them these handmade blankets. And so it's not only an item of comfort and security, but it also, the handmade aspect of it just shows that people care about them and people are thinking about them. And we've shipped like, I don't know, hundreds of blankets to this organization. And they tell us, they'll send a letter, your blankets were sent to whatever emergency it was. And even though it's very sad that there are these emergencies, um, I think it's a kind thing to do. Um, so that was kind of my first personal experience. And I might have mentioned that I grew up in a military family. And it's only, later when I became a counselor and a therapist that I really learned more about PTSD and veterans and everything else. Um, so one of the things that I do with the Red Cross is that I volunteer for, it's called Reconnections, and it works with the Military Yellow Ribbon Program. And when individuals are deployed overseas for some military conflict, when their tour of duty is over and they are brought back home and reconnected, hence the name, with their families, um, a lot of times their families and the service individuals, service members, um, might not really understand what to expect. They've been gone quite a while. They've experienced all types of different traumatic situations, um, a lot of violence, possibly, a lot of loss, possibly injury and fear for their lives. And, um, you know, and so one of the things we do is the Yellow Ribbon Program uh, offers them some type of uh, week at, it's usually a nice area. It could be like Orlando with Disney, it could be some other area, but it usually has some attraction, especially if they have kids. Um, but part of it is they spend so many hours with the Yellow Ribbon Program, and we run groups called Reconnection Workshops, and we talk about some of the obstacles and how to overcome those obstacles and what to look for with PTSD or suicidal ideation. And we do screenings to see if some people might need more help. And, you know, one of the problems with the military is that um, a lot of times people don't ask for help because if they want to stay in the military, they don't want that on their record. They see it as something negative, and they're trying to overcome that, you know, in the military. But a lot of times people need help, but they don't ask for it because they don't want that paper trail. Um, and so, uh, you know, uh, and I think I really got involved in that because, you know, I saw my dad needed some help and it wasn't available at the time that he was in the military. Um, some of my other involvement, if a person wants, let's say you want to become involved with the Red Cross, you're eventually going to get your LPC, uh, and you might want to be involved in the Red Cross on kind of a mental health level, because that's what you're going to be doing. But you really have to start just as a regular Red Cross volunteer because they want you to know all of the other skills. They want you to know how to set up, you know, a tent and offer food. And what do you do if they're creating a shelter? And what do you do if you go to, you know, an emergency, like a flood or a fire or something like that? So you kind of have to learn all the basics, and then you kind of get trained in psychological first aid and the Red Cross mental health category. And so it, I think it's a long process, but I think it's definitely worth learning. Um, and so I guess this is my 25th year with the Red Cross, and I started when I was in school and couldn't volunteer with the Red Cross with their mental health division until I got my LPC, but I did learn all those other things while I was working on my LPC. And I think that uh, some of the things, I mean, I responded to floods and fires and uh, dealt with a lot of grief and loss, uh, people experiencing all types of loss. Um, but, you know, I guess the examples I'll share with you, because it's so prominent in news today, are some of the mass shootings I responded to. And so, Well, I guess the first thing uh, started to respond to was 9/11, and I didn't go to New York, but I responded in the area to individuals who had relatives at the World Trade Centers. And so we set up an area. Um, I was at Chatham University at that point teaching, but we set up a whole area, and anybody who had friends or relatives in New York City that they were worried about, they could come and talk to us, and we would provide some resources, and you know, um, but I guess the first shooting that I responded to was a long time ago now. It was the LA Fitness shooting in Pittsburgh. And we weren't called um, to uh, the area where it took place. We were asked to come to the emergency room where all the victims were brought at the hospital, and we stayed overnight with all of the family of the victims. And, you know, when something like that happens, uh, there's a lot of different um, experiences. We talk with people who lost a loved one. We talk with people who were waiting while their loved ones were in surgery. Uh, we talked with people um, who were just waiting until their loved one woke up and they were okay. Um, but uh, but one example of a loss that I hadn't thought about was that a victim could be shot um, and they might survive, but there might be future complications. They might experience loss of a limb or the use of a limb, or they might be paralyzed, or they might not be able to have children in the future as a result of the injury. And all of those are different types of loss and complicated grieving, um, not only for the victim, but for the family as well. And, you know, I think that I think this all um, is important as a therapist. So in that role, I was acting as a mental health volunteer. But after the crisis had been dealt with, I don't even want to say it was over because it's going to take a long time for those individuals to heal emotionally. Um, but afterwards, all the volunteers met together and did a critical incident stress debriefing. And we talked about our experience with the families and the victims and, how that affected us as human beings. And I think that processing is really what I needed at that time. I needed to talk about my experience during that. And I'm glad it was available to me. Um, I think a more recent experience was a Tree of Life shooting. And I had a personal connection with that one because uh, I used to live right next door to that, um, to the Tree of Life. And I would walk there. I knew people there. And I wasn't living there at the time, but even going to that location, um, brought back so many personal memories for me. And at that point, we were asked to go. Um, I don't know exactly what it was called, but it was kind of the Jewish Community Center in Squirrel Hill. That's where all the family members were brought, and and there was the Red Cross, but there was also a lot of other mental health organizations that were brought there as well. And I think that we took on a lot of different roles. I mean, we were there for an extended period of time. Um, and uh, I think, the first role is just sitting with families and loved ones and uh, being there for whatever their needs were. Um, Unfortunately, many times uh, it can take a long time to be notified that a loved one has died, or if you know, the severity of an injury or where somebody is located. Perhaps, uh, they didn't know what hospital they were taken to. And because um, they want to be so specific and sure, and because everything's being investigated, um, it took up to 2 to 3 hours to notify loved ones of status. And that's a long time to wait. Uh, it's a long time to experience fear and the unknown of a loved one. Um, so just being there with them during that time period, um, allowing them, to express their fears and emotions. And, but then after 3 hours, after most of them were notified, um, we took on other roles as well. We took on roles of a lot of times they offered food, they offered other accommodations if somebody had to come in from out of town. Um, During crises like this, uh, a lot of times individuals from the surrounding area come to that location for a variety of reasons. Some of them are altruistic, they want to help, but they're not part of any organization. They might not have any training. They just want to help, but they can't. Um, a lot of times people come for unknown reasons that might not be altruistic. Um, So after we dealt with a lot of the mental health roles in the Red Cross, we were given other assignments. So we kind of have to be flexible for these things. And so like I was asked there were two entrances. One was the front door, one was the door in the garage, where cars would pull up, park, and you'd enter that way. And they didn't want the police and FBI to man the doors because they were doing other things. So I had to uh, stand at the garage access point and screen anybody who wanted to come in. And uh, I'm not sure the right language to use, but there were a lot of people who tried to enter that building who might have had questionable reasons for doing so. And, so if I felt somebody was a threat, I had to contact the nearest FBI agent. If somebody, um, like for instance, left a backpack or, parked a car in a strange place or a van, um, the only way somebody could enter is if they had a name of a loved one, and then I had to go get somebody and they followed up on that. But almost everybody was not allowed to come in. And that bothered some people, but had to use my counseling skills to kind of de-escalate anybody who didn't like me saying no. Um, and you'll find that you can use your counseling skills in all types of situations, even if you're getting your car fixed. Um, so uh, I think that another group of people that wanted to enter were politicians. I don't know how appropriate that was, but they felt a need to show themselves. And I think only politicians at the state level were allowed to enter, the governor, uh, representatives, senators, things like that. Um, so, yeah. And once again, that was a very difficult uh, time. And I was very thankful that we had critical incident stress debriefing the following day. And I think the Red Cross um, provided services there for 3 days straight. I was just there the first day immediately after it occurred. Uh, so um, I think that uh, in other areas, like doing some mission work, I took students from our program to Belize to train at to train students at their police academy. And we trained them in all kinds of things like de-escalation and how to deal with crises, how to deal with somebody who might have, who might be psychotic, experiencing psychosis, or have some other diagnosis. Um, and But we also trained them in how to do critical incident stress debriefing, uh, because you can imagine that police often experience difficult situations and crises, and they need critical incident stress debriefing as well. Um, so uh, let's talk a little bit about what critical incident, after all those examples and everything, let's talk about what to do, with critical incident stress debriefing. And um, and please read the article that I uploaded. Um, so the article is a little more, it gives a little more leeway than I usually do. Um, I think it says something like between 24 and 72 hours after uh, responders experience the crisis. Um, I really would do my best to do the debriefing within 24 hours. And I think for a number of reasons, I think you really minimize any type of symptomology or possibility of PTSD the sooner you do the debriefing. Um, so for example, um, it was very difficult for me to sleep after my experience at the Tree of Life with the Red Cross that first night. And we'll talk about this when we go over how EMDR works and some of the theories behind it in one of the future chapters. But one of the things that does occur is that when we sleep after a crisis, um, uh, cerebral spinal fluid enters our brain and basically washes over it and helps us in the processing of any type of traumatic thought. And I think REM stage also helps us. But, but if you think about it, anybody who experiences sometimes a crisis or trauma, even secondary, uh, we would have a hard time sleeping. And that's why I think, critical incident stress debriefing is so valuable. Processing what we experience should be done within the first 24 hours personally. Um, and that really will minimize a lot of the post-traumatic stress disorder symptomology. Um, it might allow us to sleep more easily after we process these things. Um, and, I just think it has an overall positive impact on our mental status after a crisis. Um, so, uh, I think that the next thing is that, um, I think that you should have a trained facilitator run critical incident stress debriefing. So the training only takes an afternoon. It's not like an extensive training, um, but it's good to have the training. So they've done studies on how beneficial um, CISD is, and any study, can you do me a favor and shut that, please? Any study that showed that it wasn't beneficial uh, also showed that the facilitator was not a trained facilitator. It was just somebody else trying to do the debriefing. So most of the studies show that it was beneficial if it was a trained facilitator. Um, you know, I think that it's important to realize that CISD is only one component of the larger grouping called psychological first aid. And we will be going over what psychological first aid is as well in a future week. Um, and I guess one of the words that they use a lot is resiliency. Psychological first aid and specifically critical incident stress debriefing um, enhances an individual's resiliency, their ability to bounce back in a positive way from what might have been a traumatic experience or at least a crisis. Um, and I think that um, some people say critical incident stress debriefing is okay to do individually. I don't do it individually. I always do it in groups. That could just be my personal preference. Um, but I think it works a lot better in a group. Um, the types of groups. So like I try to do it within the first 24 hours. And um, the group has to be homogeneous, which means that everybody in that critical incident stress debriefing has to have experienced in some way the same crisis event. Uh, I don't think it's good to have, like, say, oh, Red Cross had responded to 5 different emergencies. I would not run a group and include everybody who responded to those 5 different emergencies. I would do it for every individual emergency response. And that way, there's a cohesiveness to their shared stories. Um, and that creates linking and universality, a feeling that they are not alone in what they experienced. Um, and so So yeah, I would not do heterogeneous groups. I think they need to be homogeneous. I think they all have had to experience in some way. They might have had all different roles in that crisis, but I think it needs to be the same crisis experienced. Um, so let's talk about what the process is to the critical incident stress debriefing group that is run. So this is not complicated. In fact, you might say, I can do that. And you might be able to, because it is a very simple process. Uh, Now, the theory I primarily use is person-centered Rogerian theory during the group process. Um, but I I don't think a normal Red Cross volunteer could do this. I think you have to have some mental health training to truly be able to use person-centered theory appropriately. And you have to have a knowledge of group uh, therapy. Um, so, I do think it's important to have, training, an LPC, um, an afternoon of training in critical incident stress debriefing. But once you have those things, it's not a complicated process. It's a simple process that I think works beneficially. Um, so let's go over the different phases. Uh, there's 7 phases and a follow-up, and uh, they're pretty straightforward. So the first one is kind of an introduction. It's not a mystery why we're here, but I want to kind of outline what's the purpose of this debriefing. Well, everybody experienced, and you name the specific emergency crisis. And everybody had different roles, but that's the common thing for the group. And so you kind of introduce what critical incident stress debriefing is. You name the emergency or crisis that everybody responded to. And you could highlight some of the difficult things from that emergency. You could say, um, you know, uh, we all experience sadness at the loss of an apartment building, a town, individuals, whatever it might have been. And it's important to name those losses or difficult aspects of the crisis. Uh, just simply that introduction and naming of the difficult experiences um, means that it's okay to talk about these things. It gives permission to express ourselves. And we want to acknowledge that it may be difficult to express yourself. Nobody has to express themselves if they don't feel comfortable, but it's a safe place. And we believe that it will help if you're able to share. But nobody has to. It's not a requirement. Um, so that's kind of the introduction process. And phase 2 is, they call it the factual stage. And it really is the expression of what was experienced, but at a more cognitive level. And you know, so you might say something like, can you give the team a brief overview or maybe like a thumbnail sketch of what happened in this situation from your viewpoint? Now, this does a few things. And one thing it does is it shares different viewpoints of a similar experience, but not everybody experiences a crisis differently. Everybody experiences an emergency differently. And so people can see this shared experience from different viewpoints. Everybody experienced the same core, but everybody experienced it differently. Um, so phase 3, that's the middle phase, and it's called the thoughts phase. It remains in the cognitive domain, but it begins a movement to the more emotional domain, or what we might call the affective domain. And, you know, the question is not just, can you give us a thumbnail of what happened, of what you experienced in the event? It moves to an expression of what somebody experienced personally. So you might say something like, what's your most prominent thought, you know, when you look back at this event, this experience? Um, and or you could say memory. You know, you could say, what's your most prominent memory? And we're hoping that that brings up one aspect of the emergency that they might be struggling with the most, or that impacted them the most, or might bring out the most emotions in them. It's probably what they need to process with the group. So that question kind of leads to the more emotional phase, which is phase 4. That's the reaction phase. And this is when uh, this is really kind of the heart of it. You know, we're getting to um, anger, sadness, wishing they could have done something, feeling I should have done something more to make a difference, you know, regrets, questioning, confusion, loss, sadness, whatever these emotions might be. That's what this phase is about. And this phase takes the longest in the debriefing. This is also the phase where we kind of screen, do these individuals need more intervention? Do they need to talk with somebody individually? Do they need a follow-up? You know, or, you know, can we process this as a group? Um, and, you know, uh, we, when one person shares something, can somebody else, does anybody else relate to what so-and-so is sharing? So we begin the linking process, and then they share something emotionally that they experienced. And, you know, so this creates a cohesiveness, a trust. And of course, while we're doing every phase as group facilitators, we are using person-centered theory. So if you think about person-centered theory, and not just in phase, not just in the emotional phase, we're using it in every phase. So think about it, you know, we need to have accurate empathic understanding. We need to show unconditional positive regard and acceptance, and we're not going to judge in any way. We're going to accept them where they're at as human beings who experience this emergency or crisis. We're going to be genuine, you know, uh, and we're going to use all those basic skills. We're going to reflect. We're going to reflect the thoughts they share. We're going to reflect the emotions. We're going to see if there's a deeper emotion. We're going to paraphrase after their story or draw out the narrative. We're going to clarify. we're going to summarize at the end. Um, so we're going to use all those basic skills uh, from person-centered theory in each phase, but they kind of get uh, emphasized more in this reaction phase, phase 4. It's the emotional phase. So that's the phase we're going to focus on the most. As they share and we process these and we use all those basic skills, and everybody kind of links their experiences and realizes I'm not alone in how I feel. Other people feel this way as well. And we create universality. Then we move to phase 5. And we begin talking about some of the more common symptomology. So maybe there's physical symptomology. Maybe they couldn't sleep. Maybe their stomachs are upset. Maybe they're tense physically. Maybe they have headaches. Maybe they lost their appetite. There's all types of physical symptoms that every person may experience after such an event. Um, or they could be more psychological or emotional symptoms. Maybe they are experiencing more anxiety or sadness. Maybe they're experiencing grief and loss. Maybe they're experiencing regret or questioning what they did or did not do. And all of these things are things that every person might experience. So we both acknowledge and normalize these feelings, these symptoms, and we share these possible symptoms. And somebody might say, yeah, I'm experiencing that too. I haven't been able to eat anything. Haven't been able to sleep. I've been really anxious. I've been sad, whatever it might be. And so people can identify this symptomology and they realize they're not the only ones experiencing these symptoms. It's this another opportunity where we can kind of assess how severe are the symptoms that they're experiencing, you know? How are these symptoms impacting their daily life? Do they need more help? Do they need further intervention? So then we move into phase 6, and that is that it's called the teaching phase. And, we kind of explain what's going on with their reactions. We might provide stress management information. Um, we talk about pertinent topics that relate. Um, we give them uh, any type of kind of informational handouts that we think they might need, including, contacts for other resources or counseling or any other resources they might need. So that's kind of the teaching and information stage. And we're drawn to kind of wrapping it up with phase 7, which is the re-entry stage. And we ask for questions. We have people kind of share what the group experience was like, if they needed anything else, what they found helpful. We summarize what went on during the group, and and we kind of wrap things up and summarize. Um, that's not the end of this. That's the end of it within 24 hours. But then within 48 hours, we do a follow-up just to see how they're doing. Okay, hey, thanks for coming to the CISD meeting, the debriefing. I hope you found that helpful. But I just wanted to check in a day later to see if there's anything you need or if you were struggling with anything. How can we help you? So there's always that additional follow-up at the end. All right, so that's kind of my personal experiences and what goes on in a critical incident stress debriefing group. So does anybody here have, I'm going to stop recording.